A few months ago, back in June, as we turned the corner on our Roman series and began to wind that down, I read this to you. The 3 reasons people kill. 3 reasons people kill. Why do people become killers? There are only 3 reasons, is what Warner Wallace said, who's a cold case detective, Christian cold case detective. He said, at least one of these 3 motives is the driving force behind every homicide, theft, burglary, and robbery. In fact, these 3 motives lie at the heart of every conceivable crime or misdeed. Human behavior is motivated by financial greed, sexual or relational lust, and the pursuit of power. Consumption, desire, and control. I added to that, when I read it, it jumped right out to me. I added to that phrase consumption, desire, and control. I also added this: greed or hunger, emptiness, insecurity, and pride. Or, let's just go inspired, lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life. I think John knew what he was talking about. These are 3 reasons people kill. When we think about killing and really take it to Jesus' level of, if you're angry at your brother without cause, you've murdered them in your heart. And really start getting into the heart and trying to be stewards of God from the heart. If we're really going to be faithful stewards, we have got to do a better job. And we have centuries of rationalistic, really materialistic thinking that we were born into. And if you're born into a pool, nobody's immune system is so good that they're not going to be affected by the pool. So we're all born and raised in the United States of America. And we do tend to really focus on seeing things. So we become results-oriented as far as observable results, which obviously there are results that we hope are better, and we hope are worse, but I don't have a high level of confidence in our ability to even discern that sometimes. We need to do a much better job of being about the process. We think about the parable of the talents. The one steward who was rejected feared that eventual meeting, that result. And if we really had our eyes open to this thing called life, we would be less results-oriented, except for really kind of one big one. You're going to die. And you don't know when. You may have some things crop up in your body or in your circumstances that give you a more observable awareness that you are, in fact, terminal. And I guess you could say you're going to pay taxes too, right? Death and taxes. But everything else should really be about the process. And we start talking about the process, really what each one of us should be doing, first in the battle for our own heart, and then working out from there, is to try to hear what God is saying to me in any process, no matter how good or bad I think it is, and just be faithful to Him in that. Because you can't control the results. In 1880, Theodore Roosevelt wrote to his brother, Theodore Roosevelt, eventual president of the United States, his Rough Riders and all the things that he's kind of almost a mythical figure for. And he wrote to his brother in 1880, "My happiness is so great that it makes me almost afraid." In October of that year, life was even better. As he wrote in his diary the night of his wedding, "Our intense happiness is too sacred to be written about." He would consider it to be one of the best years of his life. He got married, wrote a book, attended law school, and won his first public office, 1880. The streak continued. In 1883, he wrote, now being married for just a few years, "I can imagine nothing more happy in life than an evening spent in a cozy little sitting room where before a bright fire of soft coal, my books all around me, and playing backgammon with my own dainty mistress," his wife. And that's how he and Alice spent that cold winter and into the new year. He wrote in late January of 1884, that he felt he was fully coming into his own. I feel now as though I have the reins in my hand. On February 12th, 1884, his first daughter was born. 2 days later, 2 days, his wife died of Bright's disease. His mother died only hours earlier than that in the same house from typhoid fever. Roosevelt marked the day in his diary with a large X. And next to that X, he wrote, "The light has gone out of my life." Life comes at you fast. And it can change in an instant. And the writers of Scripture knew this. It's a vapor. Everything you built, everything you hold dear in this life can be taken from you for absolutely no observable reason. Or just as easily, you can be taken from all that other stuff. Happened to Theodore Roosevelt. It can happen to us. Stewards of God. People, programs, and why we, Grace Bible Church, why we do what we do. I sent that preview out. This is an art form, kintsugi, the art of preparing imperfections with gold powder. How can a broken person ever really be a faithful steward of God? Well, that person can let God's Spirit fill all of his or her brokenness with the pure gold of God's healing and grace. What is the most precious part of this bowl? The gold inlays. Right where it was broken. Right where it was shattered. When we allow that to be healed by the pure gold of God's grace, then the most broken parts become the most precious and beautiful. I think there was a really tough guy who learned, when I'm weak, then I'm strong. That's worth exploring. But of course, much of what we call church is, I don't want anybody to see my cracks. I'm going to turn the bowl when I show up in church on Sundays so none of my vulnerabilities are seen. And we're actually hiding the place where the gold can really come through. And we can show the grace of God and be faithful stewards in our brokenness. In our brokenness. For that to happen, do an introduction, and then 4 things today, and I'll be moving somewhat quickly because this is really about Rhett. We need to honor Rhett today. But as an introduction, well, let me go back there. As an introduction, I think we really just need to return to the beginning. Okay? And when I mean return to the beginning, I mean like Adam and Eve in the garden, put as stewards over planet Earth. To guard it and to keep it, and to tend the soil. But the idea of guard and keep, when you really unpack that, is protect it. Keep is the same thing that God said when he kicked them out of the garden and put a cherub with a flaming sword at the entrance to keep the garden from them. And I've brought this up before. This is not new if you've heard me preach enough times, but we often miss the fact that there was already evil in God's kingdom. And Adam and Eve missed it. They had the teaching, enough. They had enough to know I'm supposed to be leading the animals and shepherding the animals, not them shepherding me. And Satan infiltrated it and flipped it around. We, you, me, we were all, from the creation of humanity, created to be stewards, protectors, guardians. And we not only have failed, which we fail often, but at times, as Adam and Eve did, we have rebelled. We have betrayed. We've cooperated with the destroyer. Some of our greatest problems are how self-destructive we are, and we don't want to admit it or own it. and then it just bleeds out to other people. We were always made from day one to be protectors and guardians of that which ought to be protected and guarded. That resonates with me because I have very strong protector tendencies. Tried to become a police officer, God shut that one down. So I became a pastor. Then I went into personal defense protection and all these kinds of things. That resonates with me. That thought of something valuable, a valuable person being destroyed, and then this terror of that moment, and flipping that fear into a motive for action instead of shrinking back, those are really deep and personal to me. And 1 Corinthians 13 says, love always protects. When I'm involved in mediation, as I often am, because there's always conflict, way more than most of you ever see. And I hear both people or all four people or whatever that are in conflict all telling me I'm favoring another person. I'm like, oh, good, I'm getting it right. Because what I'm really trying to do is protect everybody. I'm trying to protect. That's big for me. And I feel like my greatest failures are when I don't see it, or just because of my own sinfulness, I miss it, and I fail to protect. Because love always protects. So I wanted to start the series by just being honest about that. My own battles for stewardship. And I have a song, just 30 seconds of it. It's a real simple song. I would love to play the whole thing for you, but it would take too much time. So if they can play that song, see this as my song. Could play that whole song, but I think you know the song. And every time I hear that, I finally Spotified it and just got it. So I could listen to it from time to time. We're created to do that. And so many times, those protector tendencies, there's so many things involved in stewardship than protector tendencies. But as an introduction, I just thought I'd be transparent and personal first. There's so much more to it about just being faithful. But it's our protector tendencies that when they get infected by our own woundedness, or on a more even base level, lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life, then they get perverted. We become controlling. We become unempathetic. We don't understand that our struggle is never against flesh and blood. Even if I feel like that flesh and blood is threatening something I should protect, I'm actually called to try to reach out to that person. So we become very polarized. And we do it all in the name of protection. We become very self-righteous. And we stop hearing. We need to come back to John's wisdom. For in our hearts, we are killing each other instead of protecting each other. John's wisdom is universal. Principles are universal. Every single one of us is struggling with the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. And we're not nearly as stressed about those things as we often are about what's going on out here and what that person's doing. As if what that person is doing is actually a greater threat to your soul than your own lust of your flesh, lust of your eyes, the pride of your life. Those principles are universal. And as we talk about stewardship, and I will give kind of a brief rundown of some of the things that we'll focus on as we go through this series at the end, we need to remember that. Because what we really need to protect and fight back against are those three things. I've been talking with Phil Baina recently. I haven't started reading the book yet, but he has, and he said it changed his life at this stage of his life. It's a book called God as Stranger. And I have started reading it, actually. I haven't read it yet, but God as Stranger. And really, the presupposition of the book is we talk so much about God as friend, and he is. and all those promises in Scripture. But if you remember at the end of the Roman series when I was talking about the human conscience, we're all like the funhouse mirror. Right? We distort things because of our woundedness and our fallenness. We're made in His image, but we're distorted. So we reflect things in distorted ways. And this means that God often strikes us as very strange, even though He's our friend, because of our bentness and our woundedness and our fallenness, and sometimes our outright rebellion. Parts of God are just going to be very, very strange to us. And that's not even going to be fully cured in this life. If an apostle can say, we see darkly. So I want to give one example of God as stranger, and it goes back to King David and his whole sordid affair with Bathsheba and the murder of Uriah, and not just Uriah, however many other soldiers died in that false attack that David ordered, and just the wreckage from that. And God's seeing it all, of course, and God's a protector. Most of us in that situation would do one of two things: confront David much earlier than God did, or leave Israel. We would split. We would divide. And the way God handled it is strange to us. Not just that He was merciful. We can appreciate that because we desperately need mercy. But here's the thing that really strikes us as strange. You have David and Bathsheba, and you have that affair, and the child from that adulterous affair dies, but Bathsheba remains David's wife. And God's take on the whole thing is He is so sad by everything that's happened and by the death of that child, which He ordained, that He decides that Bathsheba's next child is going to be the next king, Solomon. Now, I want you to put that in today's circumstances. Are you so committed to protection and restoration that you would ever say any child of that union could ever be king? We might say, well, I'll show mercy, and we're not going to kill David or kill Bathsheba. But no. There's no way any child of David and Bathsheba could ever be the next king. But that's what God did. God is strange. But actually, He isn't. We are. We're the bent ones. But we struggle decades into our Christian walk to read these things and be like, what's God's problem? Rather than, what's my problem? We need to grasp the core principles of stewardship and then recognize something. And Paul said this as an apostle, 2 Corinthians 2:16 and the surrounding verses. Paul says, that's the apostles, we are the aroma of life to those who are being saved and the stench of death to those who are perishing. Who is equal to such a task? And that's the point I just wanted to focus on here was, who is equal to such a task? And the short answer is nobody. Well, one body, Jesus. No, none of us are equal to this task that we are called to. Hopefully, we're just miners for hearts of gold on the journey. And those are just some core principles that we really need to understand about where the battle begins, what we were created to do, how our desires have been twisted, and how inadequate we are in ourselves for this task. And yet, you step out and walk into it anyway, with boldness and intentionality. For that to happen, we have to grasp the core principles of stewardship, and that's the passage that Elise read for you today. And I just want to mention a couple things about it. I think many of us in this room, as I look around, are very familiar with that story. The kingdom of God is like a man going on a journey. The man's the king, the man's Jesus. And he has these 3 servants, and he entrusts his property to them. 5 talents to one, 2 to another, 1 to the third. And of course, the one with 5 invested gets 5 more. The one with 2 invested gets 2 more. And the one with 1 goes and buries it. And when the master returns and calls them into account, the first 2 get blessed and trusted with great things. What happened to the third one? You just heard the story and you're probably very familiar with it. What happened to the third steward? What's that? Anybody? He was cast out. His talent was taken from him. He was cast out. You wicked servant, outer darkness, weeping and gnashing of teeth. But here's the key in it all. It isn't about the 5 or the 2 or the 1. There's a couple things embedded in this parable. Number 1, we own nothing. We are slaves, actually, in the passage. Yes, also stewards. We have no ownership rights, but we are entrusted with things. Now, I understand that a liberal, democratic, benevolent government should respect life, liberty, and the possession of property. I get those John Locke principles that Jefferson hijacked a little bit for our Declaration of Independence because he couldn't say possession of property because we had slaves, and slaves can't possess property, so he said pursuit of happiness. And those are good principles for a secular government to kind of try to respect. But when it comes to our spiritual journey, we own nothing. You don't own your next breath. You don't own your child. You don't own your house. You don't own your car. You're entrusted with them. And you're supposed to go forth boldly and use whatever you have to multiply God's kingdom. There's a huge ownership deception that we buy into, and that feeds a psychology of entitlement that's rampant. Secondly, in the parable, still a minor point, but one I want to draw attention to, were they all given equal amounts? No. So some were more privileged than others. And if we could go into the world and eliminate all privilege and create everything, make it totally equal again in the distribution of all assets, within 10 years we'd have privilege again. Really, the teaching of Scripture is not abolish privilege, but to those whom more is given, more is expected. The Apostle Paul was the most privileged apostle because he had Roman citizenship and he had a high level of formal education. He didn't deny that. He just leveraged those things, ended up losing all the benefits of the education, but he leveraged his Roman citizenship to advance the gospel, really at great expense to himself. But there's something about the longer the king is away and the longer we walk on this world where we start thinking about, can I just protect my estate? And look, you know me and my background with debt management and credit counseling. Yeah, appropriate estate planning is an important part of our stewardship. But we shrink. We become inwardly focused. We start talking about protecting my estate instead of leveraging my estate, what's been trusted to me, to advance the kingdom. But despite all those things, and it's not that, that it's privilege, not mathematically equal distribution, because you get that troubling statement at the end, to him who has, more will be given. We don't like that. But I'll talk about that in a minute, because really the key to that whole thing is found in the third steward's words when he spoke to the king. Because when he was brought before the king, he said, "Master," verse 24, "I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed." Be careful with the parable. Does God actually do that? Does he reap where he has not sown and gathered where he has not scattered? In other words, if God has not sown, there is no universe. Remember, he created out of nothing. he has sown. He's not trying to gather where there's nothing. This is revealing the mentality of the steward, which God comes back to in the parable. Yeah, if you think God's the kind of God who reaps where he does not sow and gathers where he scattered no seed, then you're going to be afraid and not a reverential fear of the Lord. You're going to have that phobic kind of fear of condemnation, which is not there for those who are in Christ. There are reasons why we fear condemnation, but the gospel addresses those. So, he gives back the talents. You're like, well, that's not so bad. He gave back. He didn't steal it. He gave back. But you realize everything that God's entrusted you, you're going to give back to him anyway. You're going to die. And the spirit that God gave you is going to return to the one who gave it. That isn't why God gave you your life. And God's response is chilling to us, but remember, God's not strange. We are. You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I scattered no seed? Well, then you would just put it in the bank. I could have at least gotten interest. So take that talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and you'll have an abundance. So we wind down this part and jump to the next point. Define the task entrusted to you. 1 Corinthians 4, a steward must be found faithful. If you step out in faith and you're faithful and you exercise that attribute, you will gain more faith. Faith is a muscle. It must be exercised. And if it is not, it remains the same. Is that what muscles do when they're not exercised? No, they atrophy. So Jesus isn't saying, I'm just this kind of harsh, stern God like the third steward said. Jesus is just making an observation. If you have faith and you have faithfulness and you exercise that and you act on that and you step out and you put that to work, you will get more faith. But if you don't, even what little faith you have will wither away. It must be exercised. And the two who exercised it reaped a great reward, and the one who did not lost even what he had. America might be one of the few places in the world where you can get away with not working your faith out, but still be a good churchgoer. But what God says about that, cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. We must define the task entrusted to us. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 4, this is how one should regard us, as servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. That is what we are, if you know Jesus. You're a servant of Christ and you're a steward of the mysteries of God. And it is required that you be found faithful in those things. One of the things that stops us is when we get hypercritical. And that's what Paul brings up next. But with me, it is a very small thing that I should be judged by you or by any human court. What is, I've said it so many times in recent weeks and months, what is the sin of Protestantism? We split over everything. We judge people over all these massively secondary things and split. Meanwhile, we still beat up the Catholic and we're ignorant about the Orthodox. And we point out all their flaws. How many of you are really seriously considering become practicing Roman Catholics? So why are you so hung up on that? Not that, I don't really think this church is that bad about that. I'm talking about Protestantism in general. That we split over all these things. We judge. And yeah, you have to think through things, you have to decide what you stand on things, but it doesn't mean if you just leave. You I don't care if I'm judged by you or any human court. I don't even judge myself. His word for judge here is really kind of like hyper-judge, rejudge, obsessive thinking, just fixated. And people will critique, and you'll do it to yourself. He goes on to say, I'm not aware of anything against myself. If I was, I would deal with it. He also has the awareness to say that doesn't make me innocent. The fact that I'm not aware of anything doesn't mean I'm right. It's the Lord who judges me. Wait till the right time. And then he shows that restraint in verse 6. Paul and Apollos said, we were careful not to be authoritarian beyond what is written. That leads to pride. People get puffed up. But the number one thing in defining the task that was entrusted to us is that we are servants of Christ, stewards of the mysteries of God, and we must be faithful. And a critical spirit, you're directing it toward yourself or towards other people, will just eat away at that. If you get fixated and stuck, it will eat away at that. Be faithful. Go forward. And when we get hypercritical like that, as Paul's talking about in this passage, it just puffs us up one against another. Endlessly debating about who's right on some like eighth point of Christian doctrine that the world doesn't even know about or care. We're going to define the task entrusted to us. We need to celebrate the beauty of the covenant. 2 Corinthians 3, 1 through 17. Again, I'm just touching on things. This is an introduction. But just the very beginning of that passage, 2 Corinthians 3, 1 through 3. Are we beginning to commend ourselves again? Or do we need, as some do, letters of recommendation to you or from you? Do I need to reach out to you, someone to affirm me first? Or do I need you to affirm me? So Paul's saying to the Corinthians, no. You yourselves are our letter of recommendation. Why? Because you are written on our hearts, because they cared. He doesn't need any letter of recommendation to reach out. It's like, I care about you. So I reach out. And you are the letter to be known and read by all. But verse 3 is just the one that should blow our minds. And you show, you Corinthians, you messy, getting drunk at the Lord's Supper, sleeping with temple prostitutes, arguing with each other, divided, taking each other to court and suing each other. That. Church. That's the apostolic church that we keep idealizing. And he's saying to these people that are actually like just stressing him out because of all the things he has to work through with them. But here's how he talks about them. You are a letter from Christ delivered by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts. In other words, what's he talking about when he says tablets of stone? The Ten Commandments. If you kept reading all the way through chapter 4, he's saying, you guys, after Christ, you know Christ, this thing we call church, you are a more powerful letter than the Ten Commandments written by the finger of God. And that's clear if you keep reading the passage. That which had glory has no glory, the old covenant, compared to the surpassing glory that we have now. But he's introducing it by saying, you messy Corinthians, you are a more powerful letter from God than the Ten Commandments. You're a more beautiful letter. Because a stone is just passive. You're human. Did not the Old Covenant itself even use this language? I will take out the heart of stone. I will put in a heart of flesh. That's so beautiful. How now, with unveiled faces, we behold the glory of God in the face of Christ. Then verse 4 says, such is the confidence we have through Christ toward God. confidence, faith, faithfulness. It's so beautiful. And that's what Paul is emphasizing to the Corinthians. If we're going to celebrate the beauty of that covenant, if we're going to define the task entrusted to us well, if we're going to grasp these core principles, we also need to take a look ahead. Here's the things we'll be covering, and not necessarily in this exact order, but there you go. Stewardship, yourself, and your purpose. Stewardship, faith, emotions, fear, and anxiety. First place we get attacked is emotionally. The people who tell you, don't be emotional, be logical, are often, not always, terrified of their own emotions and out of touch with them. How about, don't say don't be one and be the other. How about be both? Spirit-led. Do we think that our emotions are somehow intrinsically less spiritual than our logic? Like the sin hasn't infected our whole being? Be both. But the first place we get attacked is emotionally. And then our mind starts rolling. Much of our analysis is driven by the fact that I feel scared. So now I've got to analyze this and make sure I'm safe and create a system that creates a barrier so I don't have to directly engage this, but I can hide behind my system. Think Adam and Eve did that? Oh, now I feel vulnerable. What do I do? What do I do? Cover! Now I have my system. It's covering for me. So when someone comes in and rocks your system, ooh. God has a way of coming in and taking the little boat of our system and throwing it in a huge storm. And there's your system for you. Relax. Trust me. Where's your faith? Why are you afraid? Stewardship, God's holiness and God's presence. We've done a good job talking about the transcendence and the separateness of God. We have not done a very good job of saying, in him we live and move and have our being. And really walking in his presence. Stewardship and leading people. Stewardship in financial giving. Stewardship in missions. Stewardship in the universal church. Joe Tafigi will be preaching on stewardship and missions since he's home from the field. I asked him to preach on that one. So whatever date he's preaching, September 23rd, I think, we're covering stewardship and missions on that day, so whatever else. Stewardship in the universal church, stewardship in Grace Bible Church. Our programs, the things we do, how we do them, our governance. We made some changes to that recently. I want to make sure that that's clear and understood. But then the last one, stewardship and passing the baton. And I wanted to get to that and mention it briefly. There's always a generational gap. John mentions 3 generations. The old men, the young men, the little children. But what we have going on now between the baby boomers and the millennials is threatening to be catastrophic to the church in our culture. It's not going to be catastrophic to the church. God is going to build his church. But I'm talking about our stewardship. And most of it is baby boomers beating up the millennials, snowflakes, and all these entitled. And then the millennials being like, you guys are clueless and don't get it. You're like the most privileged generation in the history of the universe. And we're not. And you're judging us. That's a just brief summary. And they're so estranged. And that can't be. Not if we're going to be good stewards. Because sooner or later, the older generation has to pass the baton to the younger one. And they have to find a way to connect so that can happen. So that's our stewardship series.